Thank you, Sophie. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation in digging into how we can integrate sustainable cooling in recovery policies for a greener future. I'm Pedro Gertler. I'm the program lead for place-based transitions at the independent climate think tank E3G, and I will be your chair today. A quick note before we begin. Please feel free at any time to ask questions throughout the event using the Q&A chat box in your WebEx. We will come to these depending on time available following the panel discussion later on. Over the past year, COVID-19 and the associated public health and economic crises have created huge global shocks. Governments and financial institutions have and are quickly developing fiscal and monetary packages that are unprecedented in scale. There is a call globally challenging governments to use COVID-19 stimulus packages and recovery plans as an opportunity to build back better for a cleaner, more resilient world. So cooling is central to the health and prosperity of the world's population. It helps to keep food fresh and temperature-sensitive vaccines viable. It maintains comfort in buildings and vehicles, and it provides a safe, productive environment for workers and students. It's not a luxury, it's an essential part of all of our lives. So while efficient climate-friendly cooling is key to providing resilient public health, food security, comfort, and productivity, it can also help economies on the road to a recovery that is clean and resilient. And that's what we're here to discuss today. I'm just going to check in very briefly. We are expecting the ambassador to join us, and he would have made opening remarks at this point. But he will, I think, join after my presentation of the brief that we're here to discuss. So I will dive into that now. And dig deeper into the opportunity and contribution of sustainable cooling for green recovery. So during the first wave of the COVID-19 crisis, many of us were looking backward to the financial crisis 12 years ago, 11 years ago, to glean lessons that could inform a better, greener recovery now. While these two global economic crises differ significantly, one key lesson is in the need for multiple phases of response, which are shown on this slide. So while the first phase of response on the left has focused on stabilization of economies, in the second phase, stimulus measures have shifted to rebooting economies, and we expect long-term structural recovery plans, the third step in this process, to follow. There's been a wide call from the World Bank, the IMF, the European Commission, and countless others for governments to keep sight of the climate crisis and to use COVID-19 recovery plans as an opportunity to build back better. So as we move through these phases of the crisis, the openness to consider climate increases. However, to achieve long-term sustainability goals and our Paris targets, our immediate response must set the foundations and path for net zero. What we do now on climate and on cooling will greatly influence the trajectory of the next decade and beyond. So what do we need to consider now in a sustainable recovery? In the spring of last year, staff at the World Bank outlined a sustainability checklist to assess COVID-19 responses and home in on strategies that bring the Build Back Greener slogan to life. So the checklist is a broad guide for governments and policymakers as they develop recovery plans, and we thought it was very useful. In the short term, considerations include job creation, so how many jobs are created, what types, who benefits and where, is upskilling needed or desirable? The boost economic activity, how quickly does the policy stimulate consumer spending? Does it create disposable income for households and for SMEs? And timeliness and risk, so how quickly can investments move out of the door? Are there established programs, delivery mechanisms that can be used? So how shovel-ready are projects really? Then the longer-term considerations include growth potential. Does it build human, natural, and physical capital? Does it improve future skills and health outcomes? Does it address market failures? Then there's the resilience to future shocks. Does this build societal capacity to cope with and recover better from such shocks? And then decarbonisation and sustainable growth, of course. Does it support, diffuse, and embed green technologies into our economies and our societies? So considering the key concerns of policymakers, protecting jobs, stimulating demand, and growing attention on cold chains for resilient food and health systems, sustainable cooling is a strong contributor to a green recovery, done right. So with this in mind, we at E3G, in partnership with the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Programme, use the checklist to identify 6 high-impact opportunities to reduce emissions by integrating cooling in stimulus packages. The initial brief, shown here in orange on the left, provided a broad overview of how sustainable cooling can support recovery, And we're very excited that the conversation has been taken forward with the launch of a new brief, shown in the middle, which will be the focus of our discussion today. So the Sustainable Cooling in Support of a Resilient and Climate-Proof Recovery brief was prepared by Renil de Becquet with support from UNEP and the Cool Coalition, as well as the Ministry for Ecological Transition of France and the Climate and Clean Air Coalition's Efficient Cooling Initiative. The brief presents how governments can actively reorient public policy and include cooling in their recovery packages to spur economic recovery, create and protect jobs for vulnerable population groups, and help strengthen resilience, while accelerating the transition to efficient climate-friendly cooling technologies and solutions. Building off the 6 high-impact opportunities, the brief gathers concrete examples of countries, cities, companies, and others investing in sustainable cooling as part of their green recoveries. A big thank you to all the members of the cooling community who supported the development of the brief with case studies and feedback. There are a wealth of examples in the brief, and we'll only have a little bit of time to highlight a few here, but there will be an opportunity to explore this further during the panel discussion later on. So diving into these areas. The first high-impact opportunity where efficient climate-friendly cooling can generate jobs, raise economic output, and reduce emissions is in the building sector. So the building sector is at the forefront of economic recovery plans right now, and is a priority for climate action as it produces 40% of global emissions. Shovel-ready actions include large-scale retrofits for better thermal insulation, inclusion of passive cooling and ventilation solutions, and replacement of inefficient cooling equipment. Governments can offer incentives and rebates to seize the opportunity presented during lockdowns for retrofitting offices, schools, city halls, and community centres. So the public sector is especially at the fore here. An example, the French recovery plan includes 6.7 billion euros for building and energy renovation to improve thermal insulation and decrease cooling and heating needs. 4 billion of this will be for public buildings and include summer climate adaptations using passive design measures. Then next, on appliances, governments have an opportunity to set ambitious long-term goals for cooling equipment efficiency and refrigerant transition through recovery packages. So this includes the introduction or tightening of minimum energy performance standards, or MEPS, with implementation accelerated towards the high-performing end of the appliance market through incentive policies for consumers, as seen in Germany following the financial crisis. And countries can also shape conditional bailouts for hard-hit sectors that support sustainable cooling, including supporting manufacturers with ambitious decarbonisation plans. 2 examples here. NG Solutions, the engineering firm, recently announced its objective to divide by a factor of 5 the greenhouse gas emissions of refrigerants by 2030. And Danfoss recently announced their ambition to become CO2 neutral in all of the company's global operations by no later than 2030. Then next, urban environments. They're hard hit by consequences of both global warming and COVID-19. So expanding urban greenery is a shovel-ready opportunity to reduce the urban heat island effect, which is becoming exacerbated by our changing climate, while also reducing air pollution and quickly creating jobs. An example here, a really great example, is the city of Medellin in Colombia. It's become a case study for the world in terms of the benefits of urban greening, thanks to its green corridors scheme that lowered temperatures by 3 degrees around these parts of the city, while providing workplace training and apprenticeships for marginalized communities. And then moving on to the next piece, strengthening cold chains. This must be a priority to ensure delivery of the COVID-19 vaccines and other medical supplies. And clearly goes hand in hand with the opportunity to reduce food loss and strengthen food security. Governments can support startups with innovative business models for cooling provision to vulnerable communities, such as with sustainable cold storage in Nigeria and Ghana. Countries can also tap into new financing opportunities, including the World Bank's commitment to deploy $160 US billion over a 15-month period to help countries respond to immediate health needs and bolster economic recovery. $18 billion US of the fund is dedicated to finance the purchase and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, tests, and treatments, including cold chain infrastructure, and seeks to embed energy efficiency measures within that. And then next is research and development. Innovations in climate-friendly and efficient technologies and business models are a major driver of economic growth and longer-term decarbonisation. So stimulus packages can champion the development and early deployment of innovations such as passive cooling designs, hyper-efficient cooling technologies, novel refrigerants, renewable and off-grid cooling solutions, and nature-based cooling. R&D grants and loans offer innovative companies and countries a competitive advantage, and come at a relatively low cost compared to the investments needed for example, for expanding power generation to keep up with growing cooling needs. Examples, there are the Centers of Excellence for Cooling and Cold Chain, currently under development in India and Rwanda. And in September 2020, the UK announced a £15 million fund as part of a new clean energy innovation facility to support developing countries in piloting innovative sustainable cooling technologies. And this has been done in partnership with the IFC. And across all these pieces is finance. Across the sectors shown here, there is a unique window of opportunity to tap into fiscal planning and new financing models to accelerate the transition and increase access to sustainable cooling. So to sum up, climate-friendly and efficient cooling provides a massive opportunity to put us on a path to build back greener. Well-planned and designed stimulus and recovery packages can accelerate the transition to sustainable cooling for all, but these efforts cannot stop with recovery packages. Long-term planning is needed, including holistic cooling assessments and policy mapping through national cooling action plans, development of deep decarbonisation strategies and structural technology investments, such as district cooling networks and efficient renewable energy systems, and the setup of effective policy standards and market transformation mechanisms. We hope that through international cooperation, including through the Cool Coalition and the Efficient Cooling Initiative of the CCAC, countries and other stakeholders can plan and promote action to get us to net zero emissions cooling for all by 2050. So at this point, I would like to check in on whether the ambassador has been able to join us by now.
Yes, he's joined.
Yes, so with no further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker for our event from a country that has taken the important step of integrating cooling into recovery plans. His Excellency, Mr. Stéphane Crouzat, Ambassador for Climate Negotiations, Renewable Energy and Climate Risk Prevention of France, was appointed as the French Climate Ambassador in October 2020. Prior to this post, he held the positions of Ambassador of France to Ireland and Diplomatic Advisor at the Ministry of the Environment, Energy and the Sea. Ambassador, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Apologies for a little glitch. I was on time, but I somehow didn't manage to connect in time to present. But I did manage to connect in just about in time to hear your presentation of this very, very interesting report that has come out. So congratulations to UNEP, to the Cool Coalition, to the CCAC Efficient Cooling Initiative, and all the partners for sharing many case studies towards and for all the valuable inputs for this report. Let me say, perhaps in a few words, where we stand on climate ambition in the run-up to COP26, and then I'll focus on green recovery and what France is doing. First of all, on climate ambition, well, we all know we're not on track to meeting the Paris objectives. We must set a trajectory that is in line with the Paris Agreement objectives, i.e. to be well below 2 degrees and hopefully as close to as possible to 1.5 degrees. And there are some good signals, in fact. Carbon neutrality has become the new horizon. We've seen that, well, we saw that with the EU back in 2019 and France, but some huge emitters have followed suit: China 2060, Japan, Korea 2050, and now we have about 2/3 of the emissions are covered by carbon neutrality commitments. And the other excellent news, of course, is that the US is back, and that really, hopefully, will be a game changer in the run-up to COP26. So really, we must deliver. We must deliver on mitigation. We have these carbon neutrality goals, but we have now to make sure that we know how we reach this carbon neutrality with enhanced NDCs, and the EU has decided to upgrade its goal by at least minus 55%, and that was announced at the Climate Ambition Summit, which we organized with UK and the UN on the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. We felt it was an important summit, which really kick-started the ambition drive towards COP26. We must also deliver on adaptation. We had this climate adaptation summit organized by the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago, which really put adaptation at the top of the climate agenda, and it allowed France to reiterate its commitment to devote 1/3 of its finance to adaptation. 1/3 of 6 billion euros will be devoted to adaptation. And then we have to deliver on finance itself. We know how sensitive this issue is. We collectively, developed countries, promised to deliver $1 billion of finance, mobilizing private and public finance, and we're not quite there yet, and we probably won't be there yet, but won't be there for the 2020 objective. We must deliver on that. It's exceedingly important, and the EU and France are doing their share. And then, of course, finally, we must deliver on the action agenda, very crucial aspect of the Paris Agreement pillars, with non-state actors who also have an important role to play in climate action, multi-stakeholder coalitions such as the CCAC or the Cool Coalition or the Global ABC. Now, in terms of the green recovery, in this context, we're faced with a particular and considerable challenge, the economic crisis, which was set about by COVID-19. In fact, COVID-19 has induced a reduction of 7% roughly of global emissions in 2020. It's one of the few good consequences of this terrible pandemic, but it must not be a one-off. It has to be an opportunity to build back better. We must seize the opportunity of the economic recovery and the fiscal space given by the recovery plans to transition to a decarbonized economy. And this is what the European Union is striving to do with the recovery plan, Next Generation EU, a 750 billion euro plan with its recovery and resilience facility, which aims to support the green transition while strengthening the growth potential, job creation, and economic and social resilience to make sure it is a just transition. And it's also the main objectives of the French recovery plan, which Pedro referred to. We have in total 30 billion euros out of 100 billion exclusively dedicated to green transition, covering several economic sectors, hydrogen plan, 7 billion over the next 10 years to try and develop green hydrogen, the development of railroad to try to divert from the roads themselves, and to have the railways go up as a normal route for passengers and freight. And also, of course, the building sector, 6.7 billion that Pedro referred to. And let me say a few words then about France's policy in the building sector. We all remember the IEA report, 2018 report about the future of cooling, according to whom improving the energy performance of buildings can have a huge impact on the need for air conditioners, associated energy needed to provide cooling services. The way buildings are designed and built, including the choice of materials used in their construction, is crucial. And with buildings representing about 25% of French total emissions, we must improve the energy efficiency of buildings and the main equipment inside them. So with this 6.7 billion euros, we really strive to promote the energy renovation of buildings. And so a few examples, specifically on buildings retrofit in France. We have put in place several support schemes for energy renovation, which are being boosted by the recovery plan, particularly in the low-income households, such as premiums, tax credits, reduced VAT down from 20% to 5.5%, eco loans at 0 interest rate, and so on. And for instance, we have what we call Ma Prime Rénov, renovation grant, which is a grant meant to support households to make energy efficient renovations to their homes. The amount of the grant is calculated according to the income of the household and the energy savings made possible by the work. And thanks to the French recovery plan, this measure is now open to all owners, regardless of their income, whether they're tenants, landlords, as well as to all co-owners. So with these measures, our objective is to finance the renovation of up to 500,000 housing units per year. And in addition to housing, we also support the renovation of some premises, offices, shops, warehouses of small and medium-sized enterprises, and also very small enterprises. And in the context of the recovery, we also introduced a new tax credit for some expenses aimed at improving energy efficiency. For instance, the French overseas territories, where the weather is hotter, the state supports the installation of high-performance air conditioning and solar protections. It can cover up to about 30% of the eligible expenditure and up to 25,000 euros per company. And in some cases, with clever design, it's possible to completely avoid the use of air conditioning because the cheapest electricity is the one you don't use at all, as we all know. This is the case of Bouéni High School in the island of Mayotte, the French département, which has a tropical climate. And that high school can rely on natural ventilation only to cool the buildings. At European level, we have a new strategy called the Renovation Wave for Europe. And I think the European Commission will later tell us more about this strategy. And finally, a few words about France's work at the international level. Raising awareness and improving collaboration on sustainable cooling have been a French priority for many years, and it came to a head during our G7 presidency in 2019 with the launch of the Biarritz Pledge for Fast Action on Efficiency Cooling and the associated initiative under the CCAC. And as delivering zero carbon buildings is also a priority and should go hand in hand with sustainable cooling, France has been deeply involved in the Global Alliance for Building and Constructions, the global ABC, since COP21. This alliance gathers about 30 countries and 100 organizations committed to fostering decarbonization and resilience of the real estate sector. It has produced both global and regional roadmaps meant to help policymakers and companies to design their buildings and climate strategy. And of course, there's the G7 coming up now with the UK presidency that has both the G7 and COP26. And the UK presidency chose to highlight energy efficiency of buildings and of cooling equipments. And we're keen to work with the UK presidency in order to further build on the momentum on buildings and cooling and call for more action. So just to wrap up, we must make the choice of a green recovery in line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, because sustainable cooling is part of the solution. And thanks to the brief that you have just presented us, we have plenty of good examples to draw on in order to accelerate the transition to sustainable cooling. So congratulations for the excellent work that you've done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Climate Ambassador. Thank you very much for your remarks and reflections. It's great to see such a broad spectrum of action and initiative ongoing. We're really grateful for France's support and leadership during this pivotal year for climate ambition and action. And then looking to the EU, it's really vital for the EU to be a credible voice as it engages with country partners and encourages increased ambition this year. If the EU gets its green recovery right, and yes, the renovation wave is a really big part of that, including through the development and funding of sustainable cooling solutions, that can serve as a signal to international partners that the EU is serious about the green transition as we come out of this pandemic. And climate must be at the center of a far-reaching diplomatic effort in 2021. And the path to climate ambition this year is through the global green recovery and international cooperation. It is of the utmost importance to seize this unique opportunity to facilitate the net zero transition and build back greener for the long term. And we'll hear more about this. Let's hear from the policymakers and stakeholders on our panel today. I'm very pleased to introduce to you Jess Brown, the Executive Director of the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program. Jess will be moderating our panel discussion today. So Jess, over to you.
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you, Ambassador. That was great to hear both your presentation, Pedro, of the brief. Great to hear about the framework and the various policy levers and approaches we need to accelerate the deployment of efficient climate-friendly cooling solutions as part of the green recovery. And Ambassador, really great to hear about the plans that France has for the green recovery. A lot of really great and exciting work going on. Especially great for me to hear about the energy renovation work in buildings. And I was particularly touched to hear that there's an economic equality aspect to that work too. So congratulations to you on all that really impressive work that's happening. As Pedro mentioned, I am the Executive Director of the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, KCEP, and I'm here to moderate the panel. We've got a fabulous panel here today. Let me briefly introduce the panelists, and then we will launch into a number of questions that we prepared for the panelists. So we have 5 great speakers today. Satish Kumar, President and Executive Director of the Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy, AEEE. Hi, Satish, welcome. Johannes Heister, Senior Environmental Specialist from the World Bank. Welcome, Johannes. Alejandro Restrepo Montoya, Professor of Urban Transformation Program, Switzerland, Colombia. Welcome, Alejandro. Juliette Cabrera, Director General from the Environment and Climate Change Department from Rwanda's Ministry of Environment. Welcome, Juliette. And of course, last but not least, Carlise Goldstein, Policy Advisor to the Energy Commissioner of the European Commission. Welcome, Carlise. So I'm going to launch into some questions. We've got 2 questions lined up for each panelist, and then if there's time allows, we will open it up for questions from the audience as well. So my first question goes to Johannes from the World Bank. Johannes, you're a senior environmental specialist with the World Bank's Climate Change Department, and you've been leading the bank's Sustainable Cooling Initiative. So based on the work that the bank is doing on the green recovery, what policy intervention would you suggest that countries prioritize to build back better through sustainable cooling?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Jess, for this introduction. Indeed, the COVID crisis threatens the development successes that we have had in the past. So it's at the core of what we are doing now. All the right activities have, of course, already been mentioned, but let me repackage this a little bit differently. I would focus first on health and jobs. This is what is utterly needed. Under health, we have certainly vaccines and the vaccine cold chain. We are very much involved in this. But then also, I would stress public safety, where air conditioning, cooling can be made safer through better equipment, filters, and so forth. That needs to be done. The second area, public jobs or jobs in general. Let's focus on public works, retrofitting buildings that create a lot of opportunities for jobs. But also urban cooling, reflective surfaces in cities, green spaces, tree planting. These are opportunities for job growth. And I wouldn't underestimate the need for better maintenance of cooling equipment for technician training, because that's what we need later on. These are also ways to get people into jobs and grow businesses. Then we have, of course, the opportunity to spend a lot more money now through the recovery and stimulus packages. And this targets decarbonization and resilience. We have made the case before that investment in sustainable programs is more successful in terms of environmental and economic outcomes than the more traditional business as usual stimulus packages. I'd like to connect this a bit with work that we have done earlier last year. We developed a roadmap on sustainable cooling with an objective to decarbonize cooling by 2050. So I'd like to see the economic stimulus opportunity as an entry into that roadmap, where we may be able to get some quick wins, such as Energy efficiency in appliances, absolutely. Cooling appliances, very important, because this can give us very quick reductions in energy use and greenhouse gas reductions. Certainly, I would stress that we need to avoid locking in the wrong cooling infrastructure through these recovery investments. So let's look at urban design. Let's look at how we build cities. Let's look at cooling as public infrastructure and take a systems approach here. Then secondly, I'd like to look at resilience and the rural space. Can we design those cold chains for vaccines in a way that they can be dual use, can become also the basis for much better food cold chains and be available for the long term, not just a quick rollout of vaccines. So we would look at cold chain logistics for food, also for seafood and aquaculture. And then I would like to stress R&D innovations, because again, that is something we would need for the next phases if we are serious about the pathway to zero in cooling. In terms of policy instruments, I believe that we should speed up the work on national cooling action plans and link that to the NDCs. Some countries are doing this, but they need to plan now under under the expectation that COVID or similar crisis might come along again. And this is an opportunity to really ratchet up minimum energy performance standards for cooling, and do that in partnership with the industry. Financing is important. Apart from the domestic sources, we should quickly resolve the question of how to finance energy efficiency along with HFC phase down through the MLF or associated instruments. The Green Climate Facility needs to speed up their plan to make money available for sustainable cooling. And I would even think about instruments such as, maybe you can call them green cooling bonds, if you will. The World Bank has developed these green bonds. But we need something that can finance national cooling action plans, and that concept can maybe be applied. Finally, let's build this coalition that we need to actually implement the steps around the roadmap or a pathway. Let's work on partnership with the industry, quick entry into this, partnership with governments so that they know where to take their maps, that they know that the technology will be available when they increase those requirements. So I would like to stop here. Maybe we can come back to the vaccines later. Thank you.
Thanks, Johannes. That was great. And I really like your focus on resilience in addition to the mitigation benefits of cooling. Indeed, I think that is one of the main benefits we have with cooling, is that it is both a mitigation and adaptation and resilience opportunity. So, and also the focus on finance, I think it's really important. Let me turn to Carlise. Carlise, you're the policy advisor to the EU Energy Commissioner. And in this role, you help shape the policy development for energy efficiency at the EU level, including for heating and cooling. Last year, the European Union has launched a renovation wave to drive energy efficiency and deliver on the objectives of the European Green Deal. Can you tell us more about the significance of this initiative and its role for accelerating a transition to sustainable cooling within a green recovery?
Yes, thank you very much. It was very exciting to hear, first of all, the introduction. Thank you very much for presenting the concept paper. And we believe that the sustainable cooling in support of resilience and climate-proof recovery is actually the policy brief that we're working on here based on the European Green Deal. Maybe what I could say is that cooling hasn't been always on the policy map, but it is here to stay, and increasingly so for the European Commission. What I mean by this is that a mere 10 years ago, We didn't have the Renewable Energy Directive. It was just being proposed. 3 years later, the Energy Efficiency Directive came into being, and the Energy Performance for Buildings Directive as well. We have seen the Paris Climate Agreement being adopted and put into work within the EU with a lot of dedication to the topic. And the European Union will continue to drive forward this agenda. But this is still only the beginning of the story, I believe. We have learned so many lessons so far. For example, the decarbonization of heating and cooling is one of the top priorities of the European Green Deal. This is because if we look at the energy required to heat and cool the products, the value chains, the houses, the environments we now, because of COVID, spend most time in, then it is a big amount. Cooling in that is increasing. So we really want to make sure that cooling is rather a solution within this very complex mix and not part of the problem. So the cold chain is vital for the European economy and beyond, but it has to be sustainable and efficient. So a couple of years ago, the European Commission revised the planning framework. We have the governance regulation. And this is something that is supposed to bring together the member states' climate and energy agendas. But it's not the only tool. It's quite a granular framework that actually makes projects happen on the ground. We have the comprehensive assessments for heating and cooling, which is essentially the decarbonization agenda that the member states present to the Commission. We have the long-term renovation strategies. Retrofitting buildings was mentioned as something that member states really rely on at these times of recovery. But it shouldn't be just a couple of years of hard effort. It's actually building up an ecosystem around this, because we see that the amount of buildings is such that we simply cannot address all of the needed retrofits in a couple of years. What I want to bring to you is really the notion not just of urgency of finding a solution, but the fundamental need to build back better, and that we might need to accompany this building process throughout several years to come. And then we have, of course, the national energy climate plans. These are the comprehensive policy frameworks, but again, we're speaking about a member state level. I think there's very much that can be done both nationally and on the EU level, but let's not forget the ecosystem. So the companies that provide technological solutions and also the demand side. A lot of this happens in a local environment. I don't want to isolate any specific area, but let me just focus on building renovation for a moment. The know-how about financing technical solutions and infrastructure planning, for example, within the quarter that people live in, comes from municipalities. So the Commission has invested heavily in different technical assistance programs through the cohesion funds, regional funds, and of course the Helena facility. So one-stop shops are popping up across the EU, either funded by the EU, by other public sources, or even by private initiative. So at EU level, we are very focused on the energy supply. And there's no question that this will be one of the main issues for the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive this summer. We also have put forward the offshore strategy end of last year to really bring the supply of renewable energy at scale into the European policy discussion. But there are also details like eco-design, which means that worst performing appliances will not be allowed to be used in the EU. And there's a clear labeling requirement for the products to inform the consumers. Now, the renovation wave is really about the energy consumption angle. And that is something that in heating and cooling area is not always the easiest to regulate, because beyond the product, there's a question of where and how it's being used. But the renovation wave makes that link and brings that policy discussion together. Now, with the Recovery and Resilience Fund, final plans by member states in the EU to be submitted by April this year, we have a time-limited opportunity indeed until the end of 2024 to use more than 600 billion euros of financing, of which, by the way, 30% needs to be climate mainstreamed for projects such as the cool and cold value chain. So I'd like to stop here and perhaps continue the discussion on issues raised by the audience or your further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. It's really great to hear about all of the comprehensive support that the European Commission is providing its member states to help countries build back better in an efficient, climate-friendly cooling manner. That's really impressive. Satish, let me turn to you. You are one of the forefront leading cooling experts in India and have vast experience working with both the private sector and government agencies on this topic. And your organization has worked extensively on innovative business models and policy strategies that allow increased access to cooling while helping to reduce climate impact. And you also co-led the development of the India Cooling Action Plan. Can you tell us a bit more about your work in India and how this can help inspire other countries to build back better? Satish, are you there? Can you try and take yourself off mute? I can see you, Satish, but we can't hear you yet.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Now we can hear you. Great, thanks.
Oh, sorry. So I was saying that thanks a lot for that generous introduction, Jessica. And I don't know if all you said is true or not, but I would like to just share some of my thoughts on what we have done in India and how we are trying to share some of this knowledge with other countries as well. So first of all, I would say that I would like to say that prioritizing healthy and nutritious food along with thermal comfort for all is one of the most important steps that we can take at the planetary level to embark on a sustainable and green recovery. And I'm choosing my words carefully because I'm saying thermal comfort, not cooling, and I'm saying healthy and nutritious food, and not just food. And this is embedded in, I think, what is happening in India, which is kind of facing a perfect cooling storm. And this is the reason it is facing this is because of three factors. We are a country dominated by tropical climate. We are 1.3 billion people, and we have a rising middle class with high aspirations. And they are all hunkering for thermal comfort so that they can sleep better. And they don't want to, I think, spend a bomb, and they don't want to blow up the planet while I think they go for thermal comfort. At the same time, I think India is pivoting from a grain-based to more of a fruit, veggies, and meat-based diet. And some of the, I think, the farm laws changes and other things, which is an extremely complex topic, is actually rooted in this transition that Indian government is trying to bring about. And this is where the role of refrigeration in cold chain is going to become increasingly important as India feeds its 1.3 billion population in a warming world. So I think, how do we define risk? We have heard Ambassador Cruzat to talk, I think he talked about that. We have heard Pedro touch upon some of the things. The way I look at risk is that risk is what we don't see, we are not talking about, and we are not prepared for. And this is definitely something that COVID-19 pandemic has taught us all. And one of the ways you touched upon that what was our experience developing India Cooling Action Plan. And I think one of the successes that I think India Cooling Action Plan accomplished was that it brought about this triple sector collaboration between government, private sector, and civil society organizations. And it didn't create new policies, but it actually wove a thread across, I think, in many existing policies, whether it was related to building energy codes, or whether it was related to standards and labeling, or whether it was related to how do you develop sustainable cold chains. And these are some of the things that we are sharing right now in developing a methodology for National Cooling Action Plan under the UNEP umbrella. So lastly, I will say that just one quick example that I would give is in terms of that while the world is focused on room air conditioners, I think India can do a lot on working on fans and using the BLDC fan technology and using, I think, all the affordable housing to equip that with bulk procurement techniques to make India a manufacturing hub for one of the green technologies, which is BLDC fan. So it will cut across many things. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Satish, for your great remarks, and really important for us to be reminded to focus on thermal comfort, not just cooling. Indeed, a lot of challenges facing India, and with that, a lot of opportunities. And KSEP certainly is looking forward to working with you going forward on these opportunities. Let's turn to Rwanda and have a conversation with Juliet. Juliet, you lead the country's efforts in developing policies. Oh, I hear some background noise. Perhaps folks can be reminded to mute your microphone, please. Juliet, you lead the country's efforts in developing policies and strategies around sustainable cooling, and the work that you and partners have done there has been incredibly impressive. Rwanda has recently started developing a national cooling strategy mechanism to high cooling products. Can you tell us more about this financing initiative?
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you all for organizing this very important webinar and inviting me to share my country's experience. So in Rwanda, I think before I actually come to the financing mechanism, this is all embedded in the country's, interest in implementing the Kigali amendments to the Montreal Protocol, which we became party to in May 2017. So after ratifying this amendment, we now walked into the space of developing a national cooling strategy. And because we really knew that we need some kind of strategy which has clear policy actions on where the country wants to be going, what the country wants to work on, first thing, second thing, and so on, in order to be able to reduce the use of HFC-dependent equipment, but also promote energy-efficient equipment, well knowing that these are the two main aspects embedded in the Kigali amendment to the Montreal Protocol. So we developed the national cooling strategy, just like my Indian colleague just shared with us their experience. And here on the onset, I really want to appreciate or thank the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, because Jessica, you came in right in time to support these efforts of developing the national cooling strategy. We are talking about a strategy which has minimum energy performance standards, which has a component on labeling of refrigerators and room air conditioners, but which also has a regional integration aspect ensure that the wider region has these maps embedded in their strategies. So the awareness campaign basically is encouraging the Rwandan community to actually go for the cleaner technology, but also go for those which are also energy efficient. So this could not really happen if we don't have the different financing instruments in place, because the number one excuse that we all put across when we are hesitant to go to another, another different way of doing business is, it will be like, what is the initial cost? What does the upfront cost look like for me to give up my current refrigerator and go for another one, or to install my business commercial building with energy efficient cooling air conditioners, with those that are more energy efficient and cleaner and greener. So this is when we thought that this financing mechanisms would be handy. And again, we want to thank the partners that came in with us, the United for Efficiency, the KSIP, who helped us to actually come up with a domesticated or a financing instrument which is tailored to what Rwanda looks like. Here we are working with banks. There are two of them. One of them will work with banks, so you could go get a very concessional loan to be able to pay the equipment that you want to purchase. And here I don't need to bring in the cash, to carry the cash with me, but the dealers or the traders of those efficient equipment are the ones that are now coming in as middlemen between me and the bank. So I could get that equipment with less pressure really on my pocket. The other financing instrument is through me paying through my energy bills, the bills that I pay every month or every week. The utility agents manages to deduct a very small portion, which now goes to the payment of the equipment. So I don't feel the actual pinch of buying a new equipment, although I get it, and as I continue paying for my monthly bills to energy, I'm also paying for the equipment. So this is something that is going to catalyze the consumption, the importation, the use of efficient equipment that we wouldn't have come up with if we simply require people to get like a big sum of money to install their business commercial buildings, or even for homes. So this financing instrument is one angle, but we also have other efforts to actually catalyze the use of this cleaner technology. I want to share with us the African Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling, which is now really underway. It's already up and running. We are partnering with different partners. We have the University of Rwanda, but we also want to appreciate the government of UK, which is very now supportive of this initiative through the Birmingham University. This is a center of excellence, like its name goes. And here we are going to really show the region, starting with Rwanda, but with intentions of upscaling to Africa, which technologies work for us, which technologies are cleaner, and which technologies are bringing in another value addition now that we are all struggling to recover from the impacts of the COVID. How do we move? The ambassador put it very eloquently. How do we move from where we are to a better recovered position without bringing in more emissions to the environment? So this is another, approach that we are working on to actually catalyze, also promote research, ensure that more and more people, young graduates, are now interested in this sector, which had serious gaps. More to share with us is the inclusion of the reduction of HFCs or other short-lived climate pollutants in our newly updated NDCs. We are very alive to the fact that the Kigali Amendment is not a standalone instrument, but it's coming to actually contribute to the attainment of the targets of the Paris Agreement. So in the updates, the revision of the NDCs, we obviously had to include the reduction of HFCs, and we know, and HCFCs, because we are aware that these are very highly, they have a high global warming potential. So this, in the efforts of implementing the NDCs, concurrently we shall be reducing the HFCs and HCFCs, and this is going to earn us more emission reductions as a country. So as I conclude, Jessica, just to appreciate the initial support, the initial working with the CASIP, working with us in the early stages of the journey, and also to appreciate more partners who are working with us now. I just mentioned the UK Embassy, but also the GCF, which we are now trying to pursue to make this, because at the end of the day, this has to be an ecosystem. We have to leverage everyone's potential, everyone's interest and strength to arrive at the bigger end where we want to be arriving at. What is the bigger end is to reduce the emissions, but not just to reduce emissions, but to build the resiliency of the population through implementing the Kigali Amendment. Just like India, our economy is largely, depends on agriculture. So how do we come in to boost the value, to add value to what is being produced, and yet add value to environment and emission reductions? Thank you, Jessica. I would stop here for now.
Thank you, Juliet, for your great remarks. And it's wonderful to hear about the innovative finance examples as well as the Center of Excellence. And it's really thanks to partners like you who are willing to take the first step and experiment a bit and show the world that with a little bit of innovation and approaching innovative financing with an open mind, we can show that financing doesn't need to be a barrier to efficient climate-friendly cooling solutions. And now we know that other partners are uptaking those solutions as well. So it's really great to see. So given the time, what I would like to do is one quick lightning round question for all of our panelists. And then I'm going to one or two questions from the audience. So quick one question lightning round for all of our panelists. In 1 or 2 words, what do you think is the single most important aspect of cooling we should focus on as we focus on recovery? So what do you think is the single most important aspect of cooling that we should focus on as we work on economic recovery, whether it's urban greening, rolling out sustainable cold chain, incentives to purchase more efficient room ACs, retrofitting of buildings, etc., in a couple words or less. So over to the panelists. I will start with, get my list back up. I will start with Satish.
Using appropriate technology to induce behavior change.
Great. And Johannes, over to you.
I would go for food cold chain to enable businesses, farmers in the rural space to grow their income.
Great. And Alejandro. And I realized I forgot my question to Alejandro, so I'm going to come back to that after this lightning round. Apologies for that.
Yes, take urban elements to develop, plan, and build urban solutions with inspiration from the nature.
Great. Juliet.
Thank you. I would go for end-to-end cold chain for resilient communities and sustainable development.
Wonderful. And Carlise.
I would like to add sustainable cold chain, having in mind the policy coordination behind, so that we don't leave any white patches.
Thank you. I loved the diversity in the responses. That's great. Wonderful to hear those. And apologies, I did miss my question to Alejandro, so I'd like to come back to that. Alejandro, you are a doctor in engineering and architecture who has been the advisor in urban developments in various cities in Latin America, including as Medellin's Director of Urban Strategic Projects. As you well know, actions to facilitate investments in building retrofits and renovations are often a priority in recovery plans. What do you think are some of the challenges and opportunities to align recovery interventions in buildings and urban environments with a green recovery and climate targets in both Colombia as well as abroad?
Thank you, Jessica, for this presentation, and thank you very much for this invitation too. I would like to talk about the challenge and opportunities from the identification of current environmental problems in urban and rural settings. The traditional way of urban planning has gradually reduced the natural components and the environmental quality in the cities, has increased the temperature, decreased the species of fauna and flora. It has deteriorated the air quality. The World Health Organization states that 4,200,000 people die each year from diseases caused by environmental pollution. The response to this problem must be a prolonged action over time as healthier cities with solutions inspired by nature. In the last 80 years, the planet has reduced jungle and forest areas from 75 to 35%. In every part of the planet, we are reducing and losing biodiversity. It is possibly the first time that we face a global problem with this magnitude. I prepared 2 slides for you. Maybe can we show, please, the first slide? And I will continue with my presentation. Yes, thank you, great. However, from city planning, from sustainable urban interventions with natural elements, and with the reduction of polluting sources, we can make a great contribution to our planet. This is the main challenge and the biggest opportunity to implement planning policies and sustainable and environmental urban interventions. I am speaking of local interventions that can generate multiple benefits. An environmental urbanism, for example, decided and planted with natural elements to consolidate new public spaces and to improve the quality of life in urban and rural contexts. This sustainable urbanism and natural landscape architectures start from understanding our topographies and urban natures. It is necessary to plan cities where environmental quality increases public health and consolidates ecological connectivities as an urban structuring agent. The sustainable urban planning is a step towards the construction of healthy environments that respond to future challenges, increasing sustainable useful areas and improving environmental quality. That's it. Thank you so much.
great, Alejandro. That's a wonderful presentation and very compelling photos. Great to see that. Thank you so much. And I just have, I see one question in the chat that I want to respond to, and then I will ask one question from the audience. The question in the chat is, what assistance is available to Article 5 countries under the Montreal Protocol to prepare national cooling plans and to prepare funding requests, project proposals? My understanding is that the Montreal Protocol does not provide direct support for national cooling plans. However, and UCEP has provided some support for this for a number of countries. My understanding is that the Green Climate Fund has been providing some support for countries to develop national cooling plans. And I would also encourage countries who have developed national cooling plans to also seek support from the Green Climate Fund for the implementation of those plans as well. And this is one question that I think is an interesting one that came from the audience. I would open it up for whichever panelist or for a few panelists who might want to respond to it. So the question is really related to passive cooling. Should passive cooling ultimately be the foremost priority for sustainable buildings? Or is there a realistic path for innovative solutions and energy solutions to address global demand for thermal comfort? So should passive cooling ultimately be the foremost priority for sustainable buildings, or should we take a different path? Does anyone want to respond to that question?
I can go, Jessica, if it's okay.
Great. Thanks, Satish.
Yeah, so I think we absolutely believe that whatever you do, the first step has to be a passive building design for minimizing the cooling load. And I think if you do it well, not only can you reduce the cooling demand, but in many cases, you can also completely eliminate the need for refrigerant-based cooling. And as Ambassador also mentioned, I think that is the only way it should be done. So there are many examples of this across the world where people are doing, and we feel that if you do it, if you incorporate the shading, ventilation, and insulation strategies in the building design process, and then think about whether you can use fans or desert coolers or hybrid technologies, as global cooling prize entries are showing that most of the entries are actually using these hybrid technologies. So we feel that through a combination of better design practices, more design-oriented codes, and adaptive thermal comfort standards, where I think you need to not always design for 22 degrees Celsius or like 68 degrees Fahrenheit, but you can design for 78 degrees Fahrenheit or 26, 27 degrees Celsius, and people will be perfectly fine. And passive building design becomes a much powerful tool if you expand the thermal comfort envelope. So I think that this is absolutely the right way to go. Do the building design first, then go for most efficient technology, and then think about renewable energy technology. It has to be done in this manner.
Great, thanks so much, Satish. And I just wanted to check, Alejandro, do you want to respond to that too, given all the work that you've been doing on passive cooling design?
Yeah, please. It's just the recognition of our natural topographies to make a sustainable plan to reconnect the city from our natural components. If we recognize the original topographies of the city, if we recognize the social needs, we can work with the natural components to re-articulate the city, to bring a cooler city, to reduce the temperatures. In addition, we reduce the temperatures with natural elements from 2 to 3 or 4 Celsius degrees in some parts of the city. And with the natural articulation of the city, we can improve the quality of the public space, reduce the temperatures, improve the quality of air, and improve the quality of life in the city too.
Great, thanks so much, Alejandro. And now, thanks so much, panelists. That was a really great discussion and wonderful to hear about all the very impressive work that you're all engaged with. I'm going to hand the mic back over to Pedro. Over to you, Pedro.
Indeed. Thanks, Jess. And thank you very much to all members of our distinguished panel and you, Jess, for this stimulating discussion. It's been fascinating and really motivating to hear examples from our panelists on how they're integrating sustainable cooling into stimulus and recovery plans and pushing for continued and more investment in a green recovery towards net zero. So with that, I'd now like to introduce our closing speaker, Helena Mollar Valdes, head of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, Secretariat at UN Environment in Paris. The CCAC is a voluntary partnership of governments, intergovernmental organizations, businesses, scientific institutions, and civil society organizations that are committed to improving air quality and protecting the climate through actions to reduce short-lived climate pollutants, working in collaboration with hundreds of civil society organizations, cities, and private sector actors. Ms. Valdes, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of you. It has been a really fascinating time to sit here and listen. And I'm supposed to give a few key messages towards the end. I found that the messages that the panelists gave at the end and the ambassador as well really said it all. So I'll just highlight a few things, but please take with you what everybody has already said. I'm actually an architect and urban planner as well from the start. And I very much agree with Alejandro and with what was said about the passive cooling, by the way. But let me try then to summarize a few messages here. Number one, I think you all spoke to the urgency and the relevance of cooling and efficient cooling. Now in the post or during the pandemic, which is still going on, and when the COVID-19 response is being and the recovery efforts are being laid out, this is indeed an opportunity. I think it was the European Commission who said that cooling has not until recently been a policy priority, but this is the moment really where it's getting clear for most people around the globe that cooling is critical. It's not only for the vaccine, of course, and the food cold chain, as was talked about here as well. It's also the incredible increase in cooling that's needed for our use of internet and servers and other things like this that might not be on everybody's mind. And the numbers speak for themselves, as we have seen in the recent reports, especially the UNEP emission gap report that came out quite recently, demonstrating how far away we are from reaching the temperature targets in the Paris Agreement. This is the opportunity, as we said, in the post-pandemic green recovery opportunity. And we have to make efficient cooling part of this. We could actually cut up to 25% of the emissions opportunities of the recovery moment now by 2030. And that would help us bring the emissions broadly in line with 2.2 degrees, well below 2 degrees. This is, of course, not enough. And for many countries, the first mile of the food cold chain is also the last mile of the vaccine distribution cold chain, as one of our partners just said. I think what we mean with this is that the vaccine distribution systems can also provide farmers with long-term sustainable access to food cold chains and simultaneously then reducing both food waste, greenhouse gas emissions, and economic growth. I think this was also pointed out from the example in India. And really the definition of building back better and greener. The key message too then would be that it's not enough. So we are not only should not definitely only focus on the recovery. It's not enough to make the sustainable cooling for all a reality. You have mentioned a few very good examples from national and local long-term planning beyond shovel-ready interventions. And I think this is really what the brief this morning that was, the brief that was presented and launched today also points out in the examples there. It's really important with this policy integration, the comprehensive approaches that can help reduce the impacts of cooling. Passive one in buildings is only one of them. while extending the benefits beyond the built environment into food systems, schools, medical facilities, commercial and residential spaces, etc. The data collection, stock taking of present and future cooling needs and strategies will help reduce the need for mechanical cooling, as we heard from our speakers right now. And we also heard one of you saying that the need for focusing on the most vulnerable and build the resilience is really an important aspect as well of these proposed activities and as part of the framework. To plan for comprehensive actions, governments will need to roll out structural and systematic solutions, as was mentioned by many of you as well. National cooling action plans is one of those, and as the question was posed before of the funding and financing of these, it's not something that's under the Montreal Protocol now, but KSEP itself, Jessica, you spoke about this, has provided quite an excellent basis for many of the first plans, and the importance of these plans being part of help to develop deep decarbonization strategies and to implement effective policy standards and market transformation mechanisms has already started to show. I think India again is an excellent example of that, and Rwanda another one, as we heard from Juliette. The revision of the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions under the UNFCCC, is also an opportunity to include cooling in the long-term climate strategies. And the pathway to zero greenhouse gas emission for cooling, the collaboration between KSEP, the Cool Coalition, Carbon Trust, and the COP26 high-level champions, indeed help countries define strategies and milestones to get to the net zero cooling for all by 2050. I'm not sure about the financing for this. Maybe that can be a follow-up question for another conversation, but it's definitely very important that it's put on the agenda. And I wanted to pick up also on what Juliette said about the energy bills and driving the demand. It's really about making these solutions available for regular people to afford the purchase of new efficient equipment as well, not to forget, but part of the comprehensive integrated policy actions. And finally, as my last message, it's we are all here together in this global level. International cooperation remains an important part to accelerate the transition to sustainable cooling for all. I think that the pandemic also has showed us beyond cooperation, it's also about solidarity and understanding the needs and to share the solutions across the board and across countries and across disciplines. So continued collaboration at the global scale across sectors is essential, both for mitigation potential and the sustainable cooling approaches overall. So, for day, but it's maybe now the time to also welcome back the United States rejoining the Paris Agreement, and the fact that they are in the process now immediately to ratify the Kigali Amendment. These are really good news, both of them, joining the many climate champions again and committing to a stronger climate agenda to build back better. We do have, as you know, a number of initiatives and international frameworks and tools that have been developed in recent years to support the transition to better sustainable cooling. The Cool Coalition was one of the official outcomes and one of the transformation initiatives of the Climate Action Summit in New York in 2019 that was convened by the UN Secretary General and supporting countries and private sector to do this transition. And we in the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, we have launched this efficient cooling initiative you heard about early on in the meeting, to build high-level political leadership and to facilitate the collaboration to enhance energy efficiency in the cooling sector between governments, within governments, and also as part of intergovernmental organizations with private sector. The ratification of the Kigali Amendment is, of course, incredibly important. But on top of that, countries can commit to action by joining the 2019 Rome Declaration on Sustainable Cold Chains, which was also convened around the FAO events and with the Montreal Protocol, and the Biarritz pledge for fast action on efficient cooling, as the ambassador was mentioning. You can participate in the super efficient equipment and appliance deployment seed initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial, which aims at making it easier for governments and the private sector to adopt cost-effective appliance efficiency programs. And UNEP, with the Coal Coalition and with the Climate and Clean Air Coalitions, we are all confident that the renewed commitments at the international stage can lead to effective action on the ground. We stand ready, definitely, to continue support countries as a collective of partners convening this discussion here today, and with other stakeholders. I heard the World Bank also talk about the possible coalition to translate all the promises into bold transformations on how we cool down ourselves, our food, our medicines, passively, actively, but efficiently. And together we can definitely make this difference. So I'm very, very happy to have been able to join this conversation, and thank you to all of you. Lots of work still to be done. Back to you, and thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we wrap up today's session. Thank you everyone for attending. It's been super well attended, super good discussion. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. And we look forward to meeting again soon. Thank you very much, and goodbye.